Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Thank you for joining for another episode of the Amazing podcast. I'm Twain Taylor, editor at Amazing, and we want to bring you here the latest and the greatest from the world of Kubernetes Cloud Native, but also from what's happening with developers. And that's going to be the focus today. I have with me Ben Rometsch, who is the co-founder of Flagsmith. And he's going to be talking to us today about feature flagging. It's a really interesting topic, and I'm sure there's going to be so much to learn from it. Ben, it's great to have you join us. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm great, thanks. It's great to be here.
All right. So, Ben, you were mentioning just before we got started that you found that developers are a lot more aware of feature flagging, what it is, how it works, than ops folk. So could you kind of get us started on that and explain a bit of why this is the case?
So just to say, like, I went to my first KubeCon last year, and there's a lot of developers there, but there's a ton more infrastructure and DevOps folk who are working with Kubernetes every day. And I was kind of surprised what a large percentage of people, when you talk to them about feature flags, either didn't know what they were, or kind of knew a little bit about them, but didn't really know how they might be relevant to their role. Um, and so yeah, there's a bit of a background story to that, which also explains how Flagsmith came into existence as a software project, which as an open source software project and as a business. Um, so yeah, I was running an agency in London, a software agency working with startups and doing cloud transformation projects for larger enterprises. And we saw a common issue with these larger enterprise teams where they were really having trouble getting their code into production. They were generally doing sprint-based development, trying to deploy their code every 2 weeks. And they were just having loads of problems getting code into production. Maybe, one team had a show-stopping issue that showed up right before the deployment. Um, or there was just, some interdependency or API contract that had been missed, or that hadn't been finished. And, four teams were waiting on one team to finish some work. They missed the deadline, and then the sprints release got scrubbed. And then quite often those would start cascading together. So, you go from 2 weeks of code not released to 4 weeks to 6 weeks, because things are getting more complicated. There's a much larger chunk of code that needs to go live, and the stress um, of everyone in those teams is getting higher, because they know that when they deploy 8 weeks of code, something's going to break. Some of them are going to be working over the weekend, or what have you. So yeah, we started to notice this pattern of issues cropping up, and we're trying to figure out a way to solve the problem. And came across there was a couple of feature flagging, well, maybe one main feature flagging company at the time. And we were looking at that and thinking, hey, um, this could really potentially, well, this could probably solve the problem that we were coming up against. And the thing that feature flags really allow you to do is the main value they bring to teams is this decoupling of deployment and release. So, normally without feature flags, um, most likely the moment you deploy your software is the moment you release any new features, or bug fixes, or changes to algorithms or whatever into your user base, to all of your users immediately. Um, and for larger teams, that can be a big problem, right? Especially if you're not doing those releases really, really regularly. So, if you're deploying like dozens of times a day, there may be less value to using flags, because you're just used to doing that. But most software teams don't deploy their code. I've worked with software teams that could deploy their code once a quarter. They had a 2 week window working for an airline. So they can release their code once a quarter. So most teams don't work like.
We're not talking way back. We're talking like today, there are teams that do that.
Yeah, like I mean, like there's this we work with dozens of companies right now that yeah, they'll release their code maybe every quarter or every month.
Yeah.
Um, and so they have this like enormously intense moment in time where they're deploying like 3 months worth of work, right?
Wow.
Um, and it's hugely stressful. The airline, they're deploying 3 months worth of work, and unless there's kind of like a safety critical bug in that code, if you miss the patch window, which is that 2 week window, you're waiting 2.5 months to deploy a fix for that code. Um, and so, yeah, so feature flags really solve that problem. They allow you to um, set up some feature flags, put a basic conditional statement around your code to say if the flag is on, light up this feature or enable this algorithm or this workflow. And if it's disabled, don't show it. And so, you can deploy whatever code you like at that point, pretty much safe in the knowledge that, the behavior of your application, both internally and to your customers, your users is not going to change. And you can then change that behavior by toggling your flags on and off. So
Mhm.
it's a very, very simple concept. But especially with larger teams, it can deliver a lot of value. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, very interesting. I think that was a great starter because you gave us a bit about what is feature flagging. You told us a bit about your background from running a software agency to founding Flagsmith, and you even went into some of the key challenges and what does feature flagging actually solve. I wanted to talk a bit about some of the definitions and terms that are related here because, so feature flags is something that, obviously is something you're working on, but a lot of related terms that I keep hearing about and many of our listeners as well are probably familiar with things like A/B testing, and especially in like the infrastructure space, there's more talk than feature flagging about, things like canary releasing and blue-green deployments, all of these. So could you kind of give us an overview of these different terms and, how are they different? How are they similar? Who uses what? Who's more familiar with which term?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. So, initially way back, so actually there's a Flickr who, for those of you old enough to remember, is kind of like this sort of pre-Instagram photo sharing website. They wrote a seminal blog post, in my opinion, a seminal blog post on feature flags and how they sort of use them uh, quite a while ago. I think 11 years ago now. And but back then it was just, there was a flag, it was either on or off, and every one of their customers either had the flag on or off. So, you literally you turned a feature on for everybody or off for everybody. And that's cool, right? Like that allows you to do really, really fast rollbacks. You don't have to worry about, you know, another build, another deployment. You don't have to worry about a whole bunch of stuff, database migrations going backwards and all this sort of stuff. Um, but people quickly realized that because there's a kind of semi-real-time aspect to, when people load the application, it grabs generally, typically the workflows, the application loads, the application grabs the flags from some remote service, and then it modifies the behavior of the application based on those flag values. People quickly realize that like, okay, hang on a sec, instead of saying the flag's on for everybody, how about we define the flag as being on for 1% of our users and off for the other 99% of our users? And so like, you know, um, so that's what we call like a phased or a gradual rollout of a feature. If we're worried, and this is why it can be particularly helpful for infra folk. Let's say the example I like to use is you've got a new search algorithm, but the search algorithm, which is better, is more compute intensive on your search cluster. Um, so you want to test the effectiveness of that search algorithm with your customers. But you don't want to turn it on for everybody because you're worried that it's going to overwhelm your search cluster. So you can just turn it on for 10% of your user population, using most flag management tools, definitely including Flagsmith. And you can a monitor how effective that search algorithm is. Like, what's the average number of searches people are doing, or how long are they in the search part of the application. But you can also monitor what the downstream effect is on your search cluster, because instead of suddenly shoving all of your traffic through this new algorithm, you can just dial it down, right? And so that's what we call like a phased release. That's a really common pattern with flags. And then, an example of that search algorithm, you can dial that up to 100% over time if you're happy that, I don't know, your search cluster has scaled out well enough, or it's not as intensive computationally as you first thought it was. And also, you're doing this against production workloads as well, which is the best way to test, right? There's because you can see things working in real time, and you can dial that number back in real time if you realize that you're going to start clipping with your services. Um, so that's one way of like that's one sort of like more advanced way of using feature flags that is quite common. So you mentioned A/B tests. Again, that's kind of similar. So let's say with that search algorithm, let's say it's not more computationally expensive, but you want to do some analysis on whether it is actually better for your application or not. So you can have both of your search algorithm code paths running live, and then you can say, your feature flag in Flagsmith, you can say, right, I want half of my customers to get algorithm one, and I want half of my customers to get algorithm two. And if they come back to my site, I want that to be consistent, right? If I receive algorithm two when I first load the application, I'm going to continue receiving that, so I don't pollute my results. And then with Flagsmith, we can hook up to a bunch of different analytics providers, and we can provide that. Okay, this is Ben. He's currently experiencing search algorithm two, and this is his behavior within the application. And so you can start to generate, a statistically significant set of results in I don't know, amplitude or heap analytics or whatever it is you're using. But you're using feature flags to do the kind of user bucketing. And in that example there, like, it's quite common to use A/B testing platforms to do user interface based modifications, but it's much trickier to do, like send people down completely different workflows, or user journeys, or like more like back end related like code paths. So that's how feature flags are used, to drive A/B tests. And again, like, from an end-to-end process, it's great because the engineers are just putting the code path behind a flag, right? The code for that looks exactly the same, whether you're just turning the flag on or off, or whether you're doing a gradual, phase release or an A/B test. It's just, if this flag is on, send them down version two of the search algorithm. Otherwise, keep them on version one. And so there's no code change involved. Developers don't need to push any new code. You don't need to do another deployment. You're just, in Flagsmith, redefining what is the reason that flag is enabled or disabled.
So, would it be accurate to say that the way you see it is that all of these terms are kind of a subset of feature flagging? Is that how you would see it?
Yeah, I mean, it's the flags themselves that are driving all this stuff. And then it's kind of like just applying different concepts as to what value it is they're returning. Yeah. So, and a lot of our customers, they just use them to turn features on or off, right? They don't do any A/B testing, or just it's not so relevant to them. Um, so there's a really wide spectrum of some people are using the platform in a really complicated manner, um, which I can talk about. And you can say, oh, I want folk in the US who are on an iPhone to have this feature enabled, but if they're on, Android or they're in the EU, I don't want them to have that feature enabled. Things of that nature where you're doing like user specific or what we call segment specific changes to application behavior. But there's a whole spread of of how kind of intensively people are using the tool. Yeah.
Right. All right. So, you mentioned about just feature flagging, solving the challenge of, really long release cycles, and because of that, all of the stress and things breaking. So that's the original, the big challenge that it solves. But then let's say an organization says, okay, we're going to do feature flagging, and then they start out or some sort of A/B testing, one of those approaches that we were just discussing. I think that probably you can even correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that maybe that one of the challenges that they would run into is, one is just how complex it can get easily, very quickly, when you're running so many tests, so many features, different people turning things on and off. How do you make sure everyone's coordinated? That challenge is one that comes to my mind. And the other one is just how resource intensive it can get. Because like you said, if you're doing A/B testing, for example, you have to have, for example, with the search algorithm that you mentioned, you need to have two search algorithms at the same time. And so, if you're doing that at scale, there's a lot of duplication, a lot of similar uh, pieces of code running in different places. So it can become quite resource intensive and even impact performance. So could you talk, I mean, and we'll get into kind of Flagsmith's solution to all of this, but if you could kind of tell us more about this, are these real challenges that you see, and kind of talk to the challenges a bit more.
Yeah, sure. Well, just taking those answers in reverse, I mean, one of the things that we've seen folk do, and this is not very common, but we've seen this in the past, is, you know, a pre-feature flag solution to doing blue-green deployments is to spin up your entire cluster, you know, like in a sort of separate namespace, and then, do some sort of like lower network level balancing between clusters, which you know is fraught with problems and costs, right? It's like it's using a huge a huge sort of sledgehammer to crack a nut of like, I just want to give this, 2% of people this different search algorithm. Um, so I think generally um, we see in terms of resource usage, we see a reduction, and also it's very, very common to see people reducing the number of infrastructure environments that they have when they start using feature flags. It's quite common, and back when we were thinking about building it, it was quite common for our customers to have like 5 or 6 different infrastructure environments, right? They might have individual ones for teams, they might have a dev, they might have a test, a staging, a pre-prod, and a prod, right? Um, and then we saw huge numbers of bugs coming up. A very large proportion of bugs that we were seeing with the projects that we were working on being caused by configuration inconsistencies between those infrastructure environments. So a lot of noise was being generated for those teams, or this is dev running against the staging payment processor or not? And is this accurate? Like, am I actually hitting the search index that's in production or not? Like, and then problems around like, the staging search index is like 50 kilobytes, but the production one's like 2 terabytes. And like none of the performance tests are legitimate and relevant. So that's something that, and actually we see, generally, I mean, it's not all for everybody. It's not 100% solution for everybody, but in our experience and in my experience, um, reducing the number of infrastructure environments that you have is a net positive. All the way down to, you see some companies in the UK, there's a new sort of like challenger bank called Monzo who have one environment, right? And they're a regulated bank. They have a single environment. And a lot of that is powered by, without feature flags, it's basically impossible to, you really can't really do that. So that's something around like resources that we see. We generally see like a cost reduction and a collapsing in those sorts of things. And then in terms of your original question around like maintenance and technical debt and organization and management, that is definitely a legitimate concern. And we're not saying that feature flags are this perfect silver bullet that have no um, you know, no additional things that you need to concern yourself about. In general, a feature flag, as we see it, is technical debt. There are some cases, and we have this, we use Flagsmith ourselves. We do have some kind of long-lived flags. So for example, if we want to put a message up to our users when they log into the dashboard, we have a flag for that. And normally it's turned off, but I don't know, if we're going to an event or, got some new feature or whatever, we might turn it on and put a message in there explaining what it is. So those flags are going to be there for the lifetime of the project. But on the whole, like long-lived flags, or flags that have been alive and being used for a long period of time, we generally regard as technical debt, and they do need to be, at some point removed from the code base. We generally see a very large number of flags as kind of an anti-pattern and something that you want to, that you want to reduce. So in just the same way that pull requests are this amazing invention that have really kind of made software engineering much more efficient, you still have this problem. You've got this kind of derivative issue where, you've now got a queue of pull requests that you need to review and merge down, and that's an additional kind of load on your team. But I'd never want to go back to the way of the world before pull requests, right? Because it's just so much more friction. So they do need to be regarded as kind of technical debt by and large. And we've got a bunch of tools within Flagsmith. You can separate out your flags by multiple projects. You can tag flags. We're currently working on a feature that will highlight stale flags or flags that haven't changed for a long time, maybe flags that haven't been evaluated by our SDKs for a long time. So you might have a flag that exists, someone took the code out, but no one cleared up and removed the flag from the project. So there's a number of tools that you can use, to control that. But yeah, generally, using flags, you would generally want to put the responsibility of making sure that those flags don't get too large in the same way that there's probably, well, I'm sure there'll be someone or a group of people in a team who are like, right, look, we've got 40 open pull requests, right? We need to like stop working on new stuff, and we need to start, working through those pull requests till we've got them down to a manageable number. So yeah, it's kind of very analogous to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow, pretty interesting. Yeah, some really good perspectives you shared there about just feature flagging, reducing the number of environments. Very interesting concept. And even thinking about feature flags as technical debt, a lot of unique perspectives I've not thought of before that you're sharing here, and it's really cool to hear all of that. Uh, I want to move on to talking about Flagsmith. So could you tell us, we've kind of outlined the challenges and even the approaches, and now we want to talk a bit about the solution and, how do we do feature flagging and even Flagsmith's approach to feature flagging. If you could tell us that, and then next, I think we have a walkthrough of the product where you're gonna like show us on the screen what it looks like. But first, we could get us started with just Flagsmith's approach to feature flagging and how it's different from the others.
Yeah, so I mean, we've taken a very like engineering and developer first approach to the problem. Um, my background in the company that I was running, the Flagsmith came out of, that was a very technical agency. And yeah, as I said, like we were doing a lot of sort of cloud transformation projects and things like that. Um, and kind of at the time, there weren't too many tools around, but there was kind of this sort of gray area between engineering related feature flags and sort of like it kind of gets kind of gray in terms of that and A/B testing companies or A/B testing platforms. Um, and then there was kind of there was a few solutions that were kind of in the middle that were kind of half A/B testing platforms and half feature flagging tools. And the customers that we were working with, and the problems that we were coming up with, they weren't problems like, we're not sure of the effectiveness of, you know, this onboarding flow or, where this button's positioned or anything like that. They had much, much more fundamental problems of we can't release our software, right? Which to us seemed like a more valuable problem to have, right? And I'm not saying A/B testing is bad. I'm just saying that from our experience, it felt like, not having code live, having 3 months before a feature release, that's worse than, is this button the right color? And so we decided, pretty much right at the start of the project that we were going to build a product for engineers, developers, and release managers, DevOps managers, and things like that. And we really weren't going to entertain the kind of hopes and dreams of product people, right? And data analytics people and people sort of downstream from that code, because we saw the problem of people can't get their code out. And we just saw that as a much more fundamental issue. So, there's a quadrant that we have in Flagsmith where in our case it's whether it's open source or closed source on one axis, and whether it's for engineers or product people on the other axis. And we're kind of right, in one corner where, we're a product built for engineers. And as a result of that, the overall kind of design and appeal of the product is much more focused on engineering. And so, yeah, so the surface area of what you need to understand coming to the platform is maybe like smaller than other projects out there, just because we've taken that decision of like do one thing and do it well.
Mm-hmm. Really cool. Could you give us a walkthrough of what feature flagging looks like
Yeah,
from your?
sure. Yeah, so okay, so let me get my screen running here. Um, okay, so yeah, can you see that okay?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So yeah, just as a kind of quick overview, um, this is the Flagsmith platform. We have a SaaS uh, version of the platform as well as an on-premise, an open source version of the tool. They look exactly the same. They're 99% the same code. And I'm currently logged into our main production environment. So Flagsmith organizes your organization by projects, and projects contain environments. And the flags that you generate live within a project and are toggleable within different environments. So we've got a bunch of projects here for demos and different POCs we're doing, different SDKs and things like that. But the one that I'm interested in here is the Flagsmith website, because this manages the features for our platform itself. So it gets a little bit meta because we're using Flagsmith to manage the Flagsmith platform. And so when you create a feature in Flagsmith, it's created within a project, and then there's kind of effectively states of that flag that you can toggle within each environment that you've defined. And in our case, we have a few different environments. We've got a demo environment, a production environment, the values for our self-hosted platform, and we do have a staging environment as well. And so what we're going to do is we're going to so these are my environments here, and then these are my flags here. So you can see we've got, well, a reasonable number, 35 flags. But it's not kind of like you can browse through that fairly quickly. It's not getting kind of unmanageable. It's also important to announce to say, sorry, that flags in Flagsmith can take two data types. They can be Booleans, as you would expect, but they can also have textual values as well. And you can use either or both of those data types when you're defining your flags. So a really good example here, I actually mentioned this earlier, is we have a long-lived flag called announcement. And we're currently like asking folk if they give us a good NPS score, if they're happy to give us a review on G2. And so we can turn this announcement on or off using this toggle here, but then we can also control the text of that widget that pops up in the window using the values here. So if you want to change this to, hey, we're doing a open feature workshop at KubeCon, which we are in Paris in March, we can change this code here, and all I need to do is update this text and hit this button, and that announcement bar is going to change immediately within, well, in this case, within our demo environment. So gives you a kind of a good overview. It's really, really a nice, powerful combination of having a Boolean and a textual value as well, that allows you to be much more expressive in terms of how you're using these flags. So just to give you a really simple example, this window here is looking at our demo environment. Looks very similar. You can see here is the announcement bar that I was just looking at the code for. And what I'm going to do is we have a demo feature here. And I am just going to go and turn on the demo feature in the demo environment. And what you see shows up here is this super cool demo feature text, which I've just turned on, right? I've just made this appear, remotely from toggling this flag. And that's that's basically it, right? Like I can come in, I can change some text here if I want to, or I can enable or disable this flag, and then I can apply the same or different values to flags in production as I wish, right? So it's super simple. You don't need to be an engineer to do it. You can do things like link these flags to Jira tickets or GitHub issues or pull requests or things like that, so that you've got a kind of more end-to-end workflow for your teams. But at their simplest, that's it. Just a couple of things to mention is sorry, and just to show you here, like if we just look at our Python SDK, actually let's have a look. I don't know. I think the formatting seems to have gone a little bit odd. Let's have a look at the JavaScript one. Okay, yeah. So this is a good example of some code. This is what a JavaScript client-side SDK would look like. Every environment within the platform has a key that you provide to the SDK, so it knows which project and which environment to grab flags from. And then we just have a callback here that is triggered when the browser gets the flags back from the API. And then we just set up the state of our application based on the flags that we get back. So, generally implementing a flag in your code is, between 3 and 5 lines of code. And, here we're getting the Boolean value, here we're getting the textual value, and here we're defining some aspects of the behavior of our application using the textual value of the code. And then, there's more complex areas of the application. So we can define segments within our application. So you can provide user context to the platform. So in this case, we want to be able to have a segment, so a group of users who define the Flagsmith team, so that we can turn beta features on for everyone within the team and no one else is seeing those beta features. And so we're providing the email address as what we call an identity trait when we request our flags, and we're providing the domain name, the email address that the user registers with. And then we have a simple, what we call a segment with a single rule, which says that if the email trait has a value that matches this regular expression, then they become a member of that segment. So anyone who registers and logs in with a flagsmith.com domain will match with this segment. And then we can come back to our demo feature and we can say, okay, well, let's turn it off for everybody. Okay. But actually, I want to turn the demo feature on for Flagsmith team. I can turn it on and I can say, actually, I want the text to be green. And then this feature is only going to come on for Flagsmith team members and it's going to have a green value. So again, we've not deployed any code at all. We've not written a single line of code once all of this stuff has been set up, but we can start, in quite deep ways, manipulating the behavior of our application just from this dashboard.
Really neat. I wanted to ask just one more thing from the walkthrough is where do you see reporting and numbers, to see how feature flags are performing? Let's say if you're comparing two different features, where's the reporting section and what are some of the metrics that you see there?
Yeah, so there's one thing that we are tracking with flags, and that is flag evaluations.
Okay.
So one of the things you can optionally do within the SDKs is every time an SDK runs an evaluation, so in that case, like this would be an evaluation for the flag banner size, the SDKs keep track of what flags have been evaluated and how often, and then they periodically emit that data back to our API. And so you can see here, so this analytics graph here is quite often used if you're wanting to see whether it's safe to disable a flag or remove it from the platform. It would be a really bad idea to do that with this flag, or relatively bad idea, because 44,000 SDK evaluation events happened yesterday. So we're tracking flag evaluation events here. And like I said, when we designed Flagsmith, it wasn't built around, running A/B tests. But what we can do is we can integrate with a bunch of analytics platforms. So Rudderstack, Segment, Amplitude, Heap, Mixpanel. When you set up those integrations, you basically connect Flagsmith API with your analytics API. And so when I actually load this application and I receive, true for the demo feature, our platform, our API will send that relevant event properties down to say Amplitude, and that will get stored within Amplitude. And so I can then build some cohorts within Amplitude based on the flag states that I was served from the Flagsmith API. So that's the kind of core way that we're managing like analytics data within the API itself. And then finally, we also have, and I'll keep tracking of how many API calls are being tracked by the platform, on a day-to-day basis. And so we actually have, we actually have 4 different API calls that are relevant for the SDKs. And you can see here, how much usage those different API calls are generating to the API.
Mhm. Wow, really cool walkthrough. I quite like the the segmentation, the segments feature. And yeah, I like how just intuitive and really easy to use it is. I love the layout of everything, the colors, and yeah, really good work on the
Awesome, thank
product.
you. Yeah, we did a nice redesign last year that I'm really happy with. Just to give you just a brief idea of like what you can model in a segment is actually quite cool. We have like Boolean, numerical, string, and Semver um, evaluations. Um, so as well as whether something appears in a list. So you can do really cool stuff like if the user, if you found a bug in your mobile application um, that was between version 1.3.1 and 1.4.0, if that feature that's causing you issues is behind a flag, you can model, well, let's hide that feature for those particular users by using these Semver operators, for example. So yeah, you can really or like if the user's basket is over a certain value, then show this thing, or you can model quite complicated like entities using this segment engine. Yeah.
Really cool. Yeah. So yeah, this is a really cool walkthrough. And I hope, if you're just listening to this, go and later catch the video as well and see what Ben has just shown us from Flagsmith. As we're winding down, last couple of questions that I have around feature flagging and Flagsmith is about just you were mentioning in the quadrant that you have, one of the key priorities for Flagsmith is open source. So I want if you could comment on that, what's Flagsmith's take on open source? How I think there's an open source version of Flagsmith.
Yep.
Can you tell a bit about just open source
Yeah.
and
So,
Flag?
well,
What's
I mean, when we started the project, we didn't really put much. It just felt natural for us to be an open source project, right? And we really one of the problems that we found we sort of foresaw is that there's a lot of vendor lock-in when you're using a feature flagging tool because you're generally sprinkling a flag provider's code all through or SDKs all through your code bases, right? Across multiple projects, multiple languages. And one of the things we wanted was we wanted to be able to give people the control of saying, I want to run this myself, right? Um, and so, the first probably couple of years of development work that we put into the project, all of it was open source and it was all on GitHub, like pretty much from day one, and we were happy with that. And you can run the open source project. There's no API limits. You can we've got people running the open source project at very 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 high volumes of traffic. And it's fine. Like they occasionally raise an issue or comment on a pull request or what have you. Um, and initially we thought, well, the way that we'll make a sort of a sustainable business out of the project is hosting a flagging platform is important. needs to be resilient and robust, and it needs to be scalable. So we'll charge people for a SaaS platform, which is what we built. But we subsequently sort of realized that there was a bigger opportunity in building out enterprise features and allowing data sensitive organizations to run the platform internally, and then offering them enterprise features that they really wanted to pay for and have a support agreement with, and support SLAs, and all of that stuff. So we then started to build out some closed source features. So for example, like SAML and Okta authentication, like fine-grained role-based access controls, and things of that nature that now is kind of like fairly common sort of set of areas of features that that commercial open source projects use to identify customers that actually a lot of them want to pay us, right? They don't want to be running an internal tool that if they hit a problem with it, the best they're going to get is raise an issue on GitHub and then just wait, right? So that's something that we've built that is now like a larger part of the business than the SaaS platform. But we very early on wrote a philosophy, which is actually public, and I can send you the link to include in the show notes, about what aspects of the platform wanted to be open and what potentially could be closed. And one of the things really that philosophy hinges on is that we don't ever want an engineer, the sort of developer, to sort of get to the platform and go, oh, I can't use that feature because it's closed source, right? Features, functionality, non-functional requirements that benefit software engineers, we always want them to be open source, because that's how you deliver the most engineering value to those folk. The kind of what we call the application features, or the platform features that an engineer cares that their platform is secure and that they have fine role-based access controls, but they're not really, that's not what they get up and do. That's not what drives them. Software developers don't go, oh, brilliant, I can now log into my flag provider with SAML. They just want to get access to the platform and use it. So the kind of like a lot of the more non-functional requirements are where we then sort of move those things away into the closed source platform. So everything that I showed you in the demo earlier, that's all open, and you still get all the value of that as engineers. Yeah.
Great. Yeah, that's really great to hear. So sounds like open source is a good place to start for someone who's interested in trying out Flagsmith and seeing how it works. Last question around Flagsmith and our conversation here is, when it comes to actually implementing feature flagging, there's a lot of internal red tape that you often need to work through, especially when you're getting started, because there's multiple stakeholders, and the bigger the organization, the more complex, the more red tape to deal with. So for someone listening to this and saying, I'd love to implement something like this, I know it can really help. But then there are so many people that I need to get buy-in from. Where do I start? How do I get the ball rolling in my organization? Someone listening from that perspective, what would you have to say to them? How can they get started? The best way to get started most easily?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So probably the simplest way to answer that problem is to find a kind of small, operationally unimportant project or, internal tool within your organization, right? So, if you're, I don't know, Visa, right? Don't go, right, let's put it in the Visa app, right? All organizations have hundreds or more likely thousands of project repositories, applications, internal tools, internal workflows, all sorts of stuff. It doesn't have to be a customer-facing application. And in fact, the majority of our enterprise customers, have a bunch of Flagsmith infrastructure running for their internal tools, right? Um, and so, where there isn't like an operational risk with those projects, that might be one that you're working on at the time. Um, you can just go and say, look, let's try this out. You know, listen to this guy on his podcast say we'll go from like 7 environments to 2. We don't have to, let's test it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And, we're not going to have the CTO and the CSO phoning us going, why is everything broken? So yeah, just start small. And, it's not a solution for every project team. There's 100% use cases out there, projects out there that it's just not, I'm not going to say phone Boeing and say, put it in your safety system, right? Like, so there's definitely, it's not like is relevant for a huge proportion of people writing code in the world. But there are some things that it's not so relevant for. Hopefully I've given, people listening some ideas about, like ways that you could bring it in, and again, like you could just literally do it for 1 or 2 features or deployments within your application, and just build up from there. Most of our large customers, started as small customers. In one way, we get one tech lead in one team, in one department, in one organization who are like, phone us up and say, can I have a demo? Can I get access to the enterprise version? I'm going to deploy it in my Kubernetes cluster and, we're going to start using it. And then over time, they're like, right, that's great. It works for us. We're going to introduce you to these 4 other teams. That's almost always how it happens. And so, that's clearly the path that most folk are taking. So it's a question of finding, a project that's not got a huge number of, it's not very big, and it's something that you can test. And just one other thing to say is it's also quite common in larger organizations for there to be some sort of kind of like internal sort of kind of skunk works team that are like trying new things, maybe trying new infrastructure, trying new languages, potentially trying new frameworks. That's a really common thing that we see. And so, well, you might be on that, you might be a member of that team, or you might know someone on that team. And at that point, it could say, look, we're not using feature flags. Maybe we should consider doing that. It might help with our velocity. And then they start to take a look into it. That's also quite a common path as well.
Oh, great. Yeah, that is an empowering note to end on, that all it takes is one person to get started, and that you can start with something small that it's okay to break. So there's some really practical advice there about how to get started with feature flagging. Really insightful conversation. I think there was so much that we could have dug in more into even as we were talking. But yeah, we've unfortunately run out of time. But it'd be great to have you back after a few months, Ben, if you ever launch something big you want to talk about, definitely let us know and come back on the show. This was a really insightful conversation.
Yeah, for
Um,
sure. Yeah, thanks for having me.
yeah, but before you go, Ben, just a couple of questions to get to know the, get to know you a bit more outside of work, maybe. Uh, to start off with, what would be your alternate career path if not for your job in tech?
Uh, I, I, it sounds a bit trite, but I kind of really wanted to be an author when I was like 20. And yeah, I don't know. I guess that didn't work out at all. Yeah.
Who do you have a favorite author? Who would it be?
At the time, let's have a think. Will Self, who's a British novelist, he was a big influence on me. Some people might know him. He's kind of an interesting guy. His books have like a huge vocabulary, so you need to read them with a dictionary next to your bed. Douglas Copeland as well. I really liked a lot of his stories. Yeah.
Neat, neat. All right. Um, Something related to work. What's your favorite source for finding out what's new and happening in tech?
Yeah, I mean the boring answer probably everyone's is Hacker News, I guess. A lot of the time. Um, but yeah, actually more often now, it's kind of like quite a various, I'm involved in Open Feature, which maybe we could talk about next time, which is a CNCF incubating project to try and build a consistent set of SDKs around multiple flag providers. Um, so yeah, like I kind of I'm on the governance board of that project, and I've learned a whole bunch of stuff. Like there's a whole different world out there. Maybe that I'm looking from one side in there, and maybe some of your listeners are looking in the other direction. So yeah, like a bunch of folk that I'm talking to in like the CNCF Slack channel around projects and tooling and stuff like that. So it's kind of all over the place at the moment. A lot of stuff in like Slack channels, Discord groups, and things like that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, we totally missed talking about open feature, but yeah, maybe next time. I'm sure there's a lot to talk about there. Your next question, what's something that you found out being a co-founder that you didn't know before you became one?
Yeah. So actually, I'm writing something about this at the moment. Running a remote company. So Flagsmith's a remote first company, and we have folk all over the world. And coming from someone who's been running an agency that's, people used to get into the office. We all shared an office. We all came in 9 to 5, kind of pre-COVID life. Um, yeah, the challenges and pros and cons of running a remote business, that's been like the main thing I've learned about and had to learn about running Flagsmith. So yeah, there's some interesting problems like we had to try and get a MacBook to an employee in Ecuador, and at the time Ecuador didn't have any sort of functioning postal service, and they didn't have any Apple stores either. So we had to try and figure out how to get a MacBook to a fairly remote part of Ecuador. So things like that are problems that you don't think you're gonna have when you're starting an open source project for sure. Yeah.
Mm-mm. Yeah, but I guess it is probably on the whole working well because, that's what you're doing now, remote, and seems like it's working. That's why you're continuing with it. Yeah. Um, the next thing I want to ask is if you could complete the sentence, open source is.
It sounds a little bit cliched, but I'd say open source is for everybody. I think, especially I mean, Flagsmith's a reasonably technically complex project. Um, but some of the contributions we've had, and the contributions that just as valuable as any other are people getting involved with completely different points of view, maybe nothing technical at all, no code, just ideas about things, or people coming from different places, right? They might be a data scientist or a UI designer or whatever. So most projects out there um you know have scope for people contributing in ways that have nothing to do with code. And that for me is like one of the great things about it, because it's not just people kind of bashing out big pull requests. It's there's way more to it than that. Yeah.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. The last sentence for you to complete is at a party or a conference, I'm usually the guy who.
Oh, I'm usually the guy who ends up. I'm really bad at networking. If I find someone and we start talking about something interesting technically, then like that's the rest of my night basically. So yeah, yeah, I like, if there's something I find interesting to talk about, then I'm not one of those people who'll like work the room, that's for sure.
No, that's really cool. Fewer, deeper conversations. Yeah. Great. So with that, we come to the end of our podcast today with Ben Rometsch. Thanks so much, Ben, for joining us. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. It's been great.
Yeah. Thanks to all of our viewers and listeners for tuning in, and we hope you'll join us again next time. See you then. Bye-bye.